Welcome to the Line Movement MMA betting show. I'm Daniel Levy from Best Fight Picks and Half the Battle, joined now by Dan Tom from the Protect Your Neck podcast and MMA Junkie. Today we're going to be taking a close look at UFC Fight Island 4 because Holm is taking on Irena Aldana, and I believe a title shot is waiting in the wings for Irena Aldana if she can come out here and defeat the former champion Holm. But before I catch up with my co-host Dan Tom, got to let all our Canadian listeners know to go to blitzbet.eu, place your bets there, and all our American listeners, stay tuned for news coming soon. Dan Tom, how the heck you doing today?
Pretty good, man. It looks like the ladies are taking over this week for the UFC, but MMA is always in the water, man. Another week at Fight Island.
Absolutely. First off, I want to give a quick shout out to James Lynch for filling in for me last week. I truly appreciate that. Now my internet is back and up and running. And the reason I know this, Dan Tom, is because the Braves last week, they had a bit of a rain delay. And normally if even the slightest bit of rain will take out my internet, but we replaced it and we tested it on rain delay day. No problems whatsoever. So let's get right down to business, my man, because look, the former champion Holm is taking on the up and coming Irena Aldana. And I know people have had high hopes for Irena Aldana for a very long time, but it seems like now she's finally worked her way up the ladder and she's in that position, Dan Tom, where she gets that win over Holm, the former champion. You will be seeing her in there with the GOAT, Amanda the Lioness Nunes, next. So it's a lot of stakes on the line here, Dan Tom.
Absolutely. There's a lot of matchups, even besides the title matchup, that kind of await within that top five realm, perhaps with other ladies that are fighting on this card who we'll be talking about. But Aldana, you're right. It's kind of her turn at bat. You know, she struck out the first two times in jungle fights against Larissa Pacheco in her first 5-round main event. She struck out the second time in Invicta FC against Tanya Evinger. We could talk about that fight as well in her second time up to bat. Now her third time. Is the third time the charm against, in the UFC and against a former champ like Holm. It's definitely, she's set up for the Cinderella story, the upset, if you will. She technically is an underdog, but can she get it? I'm really excited to discuss that with you here and now on the Line Movement MMA betting show.
That's right. So everybody tuning in, make sure you'll subscribe to Line Movement. Go to linemovement.com. Follow us at line_movement. Give this video a like and a subscribe. And even hit that bell button too so you get notified when we drop a new video. And as you guys know, we're also on Apple Podcasts. Subscribe there. Give us a 5-star review. We truly appreciate it. Now, Dan Tom, I think you kind of put it lightly, my man, because you said she struck out 3 times. I think it's more like 5 or 6 times, my man, because I remember that Leslie Smith fight. I remember even most recently the Raquel Pennington fight where I thought I even bet Irena Aldana to go out there. And in that big moment in that third round when it was 1-1, I mean, I know you remember that calf slicer attempt that ultimately cost her the fight. But look, she's built herself back up once again and in emphatic fashion, my friend, because as you know, one doesn't simply defeat Ketlin Vieira, let alone knock her out. And when you talk about that division, you don't often see one-punch knockouts. So that was very impressive. It was encouraging. It was a step in the right direction. If she could parlay that here with a win over the former champion, it's going to be kind of hard to deny her that shot at Nunes.
Absolutely. And she didn't just knock her out, Dan. She knocked her out with her left hand. She uses her left hand quite a lot. She uses her left hand more than her opponent, Holm, uses her right hand, right, as far as lead hands go. We've got an orthodox versus southpaw. But nonetheless, that impresses me, not just because it was with her weak hand for the obvious reasons, Dan, but because it shows progress, things that even great fighters, like Darren Till, Conor McGregor, Holm, these great southpaws. I love southpaws. I got all the respect for southpaws, Dan. But those are valid criticisms. These fighters, it probably wouldn't hurt, even though they make their money off their left side, to, God forbid, use their right side just a little bit more. The fact that Aldana, despite not coming from a striking background or a combat sports background, which she really doesn't in comparison to someone like Holm, who comes from all this accoladed backgrounds, she's showing, at least in MMA and in the higher level, she's staying active, and she's arguably showing more growth than Holm. Yes, Holm's got the clinch game, which is valid, and I'm really curious. That's the question for me, Dan. Can she avoid the clinch of Holm? Because we know Holm, her point-scoring sensibilities aren't just at distance, at range on the feet. they also exist in the clinch. She's really big. She's really strong and athletic, even though I think there'll be some good size parity with Aldana, and Aldana is an athlete herself. I would probably have to give the overall strength edge to Holm, and I think Holm is probably the safer bet, or at least the safer pick. I mean, we could talk about bets, in a second if you want. But that being said, I do find myself somewhat reluctantly siding with the underdog in this spot if I'm showing my cards here, Dan.
Yeah, listen, there's a lot of different angles to attack this fight from. Obviously, I'm really glad that Dan Tom went ahead and mentioned the clinch angle for Holly Holm, because she's got this reputation of being a former, world champion boxer. She won the UFC title with a head kick. She won her last fight with 3 rounds of clinching. So honestly, man, she's pretty damn well rounded. The thing with this matchup specifically, and the area that I look at, if you want to talk numbers, let's talk numbers right now, Dan Tom, because Irena Aldana lands more than twice the output as Holly Holm. But you ready for this, Dan Tom? She also gets hit twice as much as Holly Holm. So she's got better output, but worse defense. So it's one of those things where I feel like if Holly Holm actually decides to let it go in this fight, she can have a lot of success, because for whatever reason, the head movement is not going to be on point with Irena Aldana. I love Irena Aldana. I mean, the kind of respect I have for the Mexican Warriors, and also, having family from Mexico, I just have a natural bias towards the Mexican fighters. But that being said, man, if Irena Aldana could just tighten up that defense just this much more, Dan Tom, I feel like that would translate to a potential title shot. So I think that's her big key here. She needs to not get hit as much as she's been getting hit in these past fights, and she's got to keep that output the same as it's been. She does that, I think she's got a good chance here, Dan.
Yeah, when I was first watching this fight, I was kind of thinking the same thing. If she really sits down, like you said, and really kind of puts emphasis on it. And I think she was showing that a little bit in her defense. She was trying to show even more of her right hand in her defense up until the Amanda Nunes fight, I should say. And let's be honest, I don't blame anybody for being scared off of that game plan after suffering some knockout losses from Amanda Nunes, especially when she's using her own move against her, which I think the head kick open stance will be open in both ways. I was worried for Aldana because her head movement is pretty suspect, although she has made improvements recently in her career, along with her footwork that are assisting that. But if you look early in her career and even the beginning of her UFC career, she actually got hit with a lot of head kicks from the left from the left side, even against orthodox fighters, because she's only fought orthodox fighters. So when they were throwing switch kicks, so that's definitely worrisome. And I agree with that point. However, I don't know if I trust Holly Holm to do that, and I don't know if she can do that. Aldana, she's not beyond being rocked. We've seen her rocked in fights before. So again, it shouldn't be a surprise if Holly Holm does decide to sit down and commit. However, Aldana recovers really well if you can't finish the job. And again, I think Holm is a bit reluctant. She's found that safer outlet of the clinch, which I don't blame her. Hate on Jackson Wink fighters all you want, folks. They win fights a lot of times because of strategy. They've been doing round-winning strategies. They were the inventors of the late takedown before it became in style, folks, for those who don't know. And they've kept up with trends since. So love or hate them, that is a fact. The point-scoring sensibilities are alive here, despite the numbers that Dan laid out. That is a fact, because like laid out those output numbers. It's like the Babe Ruth angle, She puts out a lot, but she also takes a lot. However, I think it's Holm, like to my previous point, Dan. I think she's the one that has to hit the proverbial home run here. Otherwise, she has to show dominant clinch control early and often to win this fight. And I don't think she's going to want to go for takedown. So she's going to have to play that middle ground, because even though she showed a decent top game against Megan Anderson, Aldana, say what you will about that third round, I was pulling my hair out too. We could talk about Raquel Pennington, who was a fighter that just, I feel like I'm blind to. It's like the Francimar Bajos of females for me, for people who get that reference. So don't listen to me on those takes. But yes, you're right, Dan. I was pulling my hair out of that third round. But that aside, I still think that she is the deceptively better jiu-jitsu and submission grappler. So for me, it all comes down to that clinch.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking of more numbers, Irena Aldana has some of the best takedown defense in the history of the division at 93% currently. And that's pretty damn good. And also you look at the takedown accuracy of Holly Holm, 27%. But that doesn't mean she can't come out here and get a takedown and offset those numbers. So it's just one of those things that I'm paying attention to, because like when you talk about the clinch, you're 100% correct, but this is a 5-round fight, not a 3-round fight. So for her to, effectively use that clinch, she's got to do it for 3 out of the 5 rounds, maybe land a head kick somewhere in between. Now, I personally think she's got more of a likelihood of landing that big shot just because of how hittable Aldana is. But that being said, I kind of think that Holly Holm is slowing down a little bit, Dan Tom, and I kind of feel like Irena Aldana is on the up and up. So it's one of those situations where I'll be straightforward. I do kind of have a bias when you're talking about, the up-and-comer versus the fading former champion. I usually like to take the up-and-comer in that spot. This is one of those spots. She's the underdog here. Now, if she was slight chalk like she was versus Rocky Pennington, then I'd be a little bit sketched out because there's something about that slight chalk that it doesn't hit that often, just so you know, Dan Tom. But in this spot, I'm going to slightly roll with Irena Aldana. I feel like she's got more upside here. She's got more to prove, and she gains more with a win in this spot. So I'm going to roll with Mexico's own Irena Aldana.
Dan, you're straight up one of the people I respect most when it comes for a feel on those numbers, whether we're talking about the minus 200 favorites, the slight favorites. You know your talk on that. I don't disagree there, sir. And in fact, I find myself agreeing. I already submitted my article for Junkie this week, and my official prediction was Aldana by decision because of the volume and output. She also has that stick and move sensibility. She can come forward and counter. And even though she has questions to answer in the southpaw stance, that same mirror match works the other way because Holm now faces not just a rare opponent who matches her in size at 5'9", like other opponents who have beaten her like GDR and Amanda Nunes, but someone else who can maybe just as frustratingly stick and move. She's going to have to deal with tasting her own medicine. So at dog odds, I'm going to agree, but as I stated in my breakdown, I'm leaving the door open for a late round finish. I don't really think that little tidbit helps any on betting angles. But if Holm is slowing down, like you said so yourself, Dan, and I agree, she is 38, but just next month she will be 39, folks, with a lot of miles at that. Those things tend to happen. Now, she looks like she's got a good strength and conditioning routine. Don't want to underestimate that. But that being said, I think Aldana actually does better as later rounds go on. Despite only seeing her in a 4th round in a fight, by the way, she took early in her career against Tanya Evinger, had the flu, had plenty of chances to go out, and she kept fighting to the bitter 4th round. So I'll take Aldana as well.
Now in the co-main event of the evening, Dan Tom, we got the heavyweights because Yorgan de Castro is taking on Carlos Felipe. And I know a lot of fans were asking, well, why did the UFC make this the co-main event? And I think the reason why, Dan Tom, is because these two are going to go out there and stand and bang until one man falls. And when you got the big boys standing and trading, it's oftentimes a very exciting fight. And Yorgan de Castro, look, I'm hesitant to lay big chalk on someone that's had less than 10 pro fights. You know how I feel about the fighters with less than 10 pro fights. I mean, this guy's had less than 8 pro fights, Dan Tom. But one thing I know about Yorgan de Castro is he kicks like an absolute mule. He's got an amazing story, too. You hear about his story, moving to the States. Pretty amazing stuff. His hands are serious too. It's just that when you're talking about, minus 270, minus 280, I need insurance, Dan Tom. I need to know that he can go 3 rounds hard in case he doesn't get this first round knockout, because that last fight with Greg Hardy, and all the credit goes to Greg Hardy. I mean, he's developed a very nice point fighting style. He knows how to go out there and win decisions. So I enjoy watching Greg Hardy fight. It's just that in that fight, Yorgan de Castro came out throwing heat, man, in the first 3 minutes, and then he kind of just stopped fighting. And he'll even admit that himself. You hear his interview. He says that, according to him, he got hurt. Maybe that's true. Maybe that's not true. Maybe it was mental. I don't know what the deal is. Maybe he gassed himself out throwing the kind of heat he was throwing. But I felt like even though that was kind of an alarming loss, I feel like that's the kind of loss you can actually go back to the drawing board and learn from, Dan, because now he knows what he's got to work on. Now he knows that, like, hey, like, not everybody's going to go down from the first punch I land. Not everyone's going to just take one kick and fall over and cry uncle. You know what I mean? So I feel like now he knows that, hey, to hang around in the UFC heavyweight division against the big boys, you got to be able to go the 3-round distance. And now that he knows that, I feel like he's going to come out here a little more prepared. And you were giving these examples about Jackson Wink in the last breakdown we did. And interestingly enough, I believe that Yorgan de Castro actually did this camp with Jackson Wink. Now, someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I did see a picture of him in the Fight Island Octagon with Holly Holm, with Greg Jackson, with Winklejohn, with all those people. So either he was photobombing or he did the camp with Jackson Wiggs. So I'm inclined to guess he did the camp with those guys. Now, I'm actually kind of curious why, because I know he's got a great thing in New England with Tyson Chartier and all those guys. Maybe he needed some bigger bodies to work with. Maybe that's what the deal was. Maybe he's got like amazing coaches in New England, but he didn't have enough like big bodies. I don't know, because he's got Mike Rodriguez there. So I'm not entirely sure what the deal is, but I'd like to know. But that being said, Carlos Felipe, another guy with less than 10 pro fights, Dan Tom. And, he's an exciting Brazilian brawler. He's going to come out here and bang. But I got to say, man, it doesn't give me much confidence when you go out there and lose to a guy like Sergey Spivak. And that's no disrespect to Spivak. He's been going out there getting schoolyard headlocks, whether you like to call it a scarfold, whether you like to call it a case of Katami, whatever the case may be. It kind of reminds me of like Olenek against Mirko Krokop. I know you remember that finish, Dan Tom, the schoolyard headlock. But at the UFC level, it's really hard to trust when you lose to, no offense, bottom of the barrel heavyweights like Sergey Spivak. So that being said, though, it might be a dog or pass situation, Dan Tom, because we're not talking about minus 150 Yorgan de Castro. We're talking about almost minus 300 Yorgan de Castro. And I don't know if he can go 3 rounds hard. So I kind of need to sit back in this one and kind of assess, the improvements he's made, see if he can actually go out there, learn from the mistakes he made the last fight, and, kind of try to improve on that. It's just that one of those things where it's like he might get a first round knockout anyways, So I liked Yorgan de Castro at like plus 110 against Justin Taffa. I even bet him there, but plus 110 and minus 300 are completely different stories, Dan Tom. So I do have Yorgan de Castro winning this fight, and I will pick him outright, but at near 3-1, this is a dog or pass situation, Dan Tom.
Yeah, man. You call this fight the Otter Pops Fight Night Special. I hope they bring the Otter Pops back, because Carlos Felipe was the fighter, one of the first fights of the night when he fought Spivak, when they had the Otter Pops in the cage. And I snapped a picture off of that bad boy, and boy, were those two specimens to have pictured under the Otter Pops in the UFC cage. I mean, if that doesn't say pandemic era fighting, I don't know what does. But Carlos Felipe is back despite losing to Spivak. And yeah, man, that's disturbing when you can't beat Spivak, a guy who looks like he's out there fighting for rights to some ice fishing hole in Northern Europe. Like, you can't beat that guy. I don't know if you're going to beat Yorgan de Castro for the Otter Pops. You know what I'm saying? That being said, I mean, you're right. Is Yorgan a minus 300 guy? I mean, I love him. He's a great story. I was there at his Apex leg kick TKO, Grats to you on hitting that cash. I'm sure that felt good against Taffa. But, I mean, this is a dude who brings the high school principal he works for to corner him. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I know school's been out during this pandemic era, Dan, but does that mean he's going to have his the principal in his corner? I don't know. But when you're having to factor that kind of a question in, you shouldn't be laying over minus 200 chalk. Forget that it's heavyweight MMA, folks. So for it being heavyweight MMA, I don't blame you or anybody else, Dan, saying that this is a dog or pass fight. I agree. Perhaps I'll discuss it more since it technically is the co-main event. I will cover it in my betting sheet as per usual at Line Movement. But I may be looking at maybe more of an over or under angle on here, depending on the line. But I think this one actually could go over, which will suck for us, because if there isn't a quick finish, I have a feeling these two guys kind of stare at each other till the bell rings in the third.
I hope you're wrong about that, man. But listen,
I hope so too.
Speaking of that fight you were in attendance for, the leg kick TKO, interestingly enough, I actually know the opponent he was in there with, Alton Meeks, because he fought in the NFC, which is actually the organization here in the Southeast in Atlanta, Georgia, that I commentate for. So I called Alton Meeks' last fight against Larry Green right before he got the Contender Series call. So for Yorgan de Castro to go out there and dismantle him like that was a big statement in my eyes, because I know the kind of wrestler that Alton Meeks is. But again, Dan Tom, back to the point we're making, that was a first-round finish. And I'm not one of these guys that sits here and discredits first-round finishes, because a win is a win. I mean, you can't sit here and be like, oh, that wasn't a legit win because it was in the first round. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, when you're talking about minus 300, I need proof that he can win a fight past the first round. I don't have that up until this moment. And again, he might win by first round knockout again. So congrats to him if he does. But I'm going to sit back and enjoy this one, hopefully get a better line on him in a different matchup the next time, and we'll take it from there, Dan Tom.
Yeah, man, especially if he can, style on Carlos Felipe's thick legs, then maybe you'll get a nice line regardless of that opponent. I do know what you're saying. And for that reason, I will side with the favorite here, despite the flags that I think we fairly stated.
So in the featured bout, Dan Tom, we got Germaine de Randamie taking on Julianna Pena. And I mean, there's always that one fight on the card that's the pure striker versus the pure grappler. And, oftentimes in 2020, we don't even like to use those examples anymore because you'll see the striker winning by submission. You'll see the grappler winning by knockout. But I will be shocked if Julianna Pena gets a standing knockout. I will be shocked if Germaine de Randamie gets a submission in this fight. Now, Dan Tom, I'm going to go ahead and give you my pick real quick. I'm going to break it down, but I'm going to give you my pick first. Let's throw out a stat real quick. 90% of fights hit the mat, but 100% of fights start standing. So for that reason alone, I got Germaine de Randamie in this fight. But let me say this, Dan Tom. I am very worried if Germaine de Randamie gets taken down here. One thing about Julianna Pena, look, the stand-up is not the prettiest at all. Let's just get out the way. The technique it hasn't evolved on the feet. It hasn't improved. I mean, her stand-up is ugly. No offense, Julianna Pena, because you're very relentless and you're amazing on the mat. So that's why you've been able to get away with that horrendous stand-up. No offense. I mean, let's just call it how it is, Dan Tom. We're not going to sit here and bullshit the fans and act like Julianna Pena has some amazing stand-up because you know damn well she doesn't. But that being said, man, Germaine de Randamie, I know you saw that interview that came out about the Nunes fight. That's that kind of shit I don't like to hear, Dan Tom. When they get laid on and they start talking about, oh, they only wanted to lay on me. They didn't want to fight. I cannot stand that stuff because guess what? This is not a Muay Thai fight. This is not a kickboxing fight. This is an MMA fight. And it's perfectly legal to take someone down and submit them, lay on them, do whatever the hell you want. So this whole I exposed Amanda Nunes thing, like what? Like how you exposed Amanda Nunes? I mean, how do you justify saying you exposed Amanda Nunes when you couldn't even get up from bottom? Like, it makes zero sense to me whatsoever. And that kind of delusion is kind of making me hesitant to pull the trigger on Germaine de Randamie, even though I feel like she could come out here and just lay out Julianna Pena in the first exchange. So I kind of view this like the Aspen Ladd fight where going into that fight, if Aspen Ladd gets on top of Germaine de Randamie, it might have been a quick night for Aspen Ladd, but she wasn't able to do that. And I mean, the striking differential between Aspen Ladd and Germaine de Randamie is similar to the striking differential here between Germaine de Randamie and Julianna Pena. If Julianna Pena cannot get this fight to the mat, Dan Tom, she is in big, big trouble. Now let's talk about the takedown defense of Germaine de Randamie. I feel like it's somewhat underrated. I mean, the only person in UFC history to take her down is the GOAT, Amanda the Lioness Nunes. Took her down the first time they fought, finished her in the first round, took her down the second time they fought. But if you want to talk about improvements, they fought twice. First time, first round finish, second time decision. So at least she was able to survive the second time around. So that's a step in the right direction. Now, as far as her takedown defense and me saying it's underrated, I feel like her takedown defense is best against the fence. She's got one of those kind of long bodies. She's got that nice wide base. And even though she doesn't do traditional things that I like swing for underhooks or push the head down, whatever the case may be, that wide base with that long body and that back against the fence is kind of good enough to keep her vertical and upright for the most part. So if she can kind of, lean against the fence, but not for too long a time, man, because that Julianna Pena is going to start throwing those knees to the thighs, going to try to Randy Couture, dirty box it up a little bit if she can't get the takedown. So Germaine can't hang out in the clinch too long. But that being said, man, if she's able to use that long body, that nice wide base, kind of separate, Julianna Pena is going to be in big trouble every single striking exchange. So back to the stat I initially laid out. 90% of fights hit the mat. 100% of fights start standing. I got Germaine de Randamie via knockout.
I was really curious where you'd be on this fight, Dan. I wasn't sure. And for people that don't know, peeling back the curtain, me and Dan don't discuss picks before the show. This is all organic. You guys see each and every week, not just this week. So that was really good to know. And I ended up on the same side as you. Again, I'm admittedly a bit light on on running through my proverbial comb of normal tape study up at this point of the week. However, one of the things I did make sure to watch before the show, Dan, was refreshment on Julianna Pena, because there's not much to refresh in recent years. I'm talking about her fight, of course, with Nico Montano. Now, say what you will about Nico Montano, she does specialize as well in the grappling and making fights ugly. You know, she does offer some southpaw looks, but that's not really her strength on the feet. So she's underrated there. Say what you will. That being said, I did not like, speaking of underhooks, that Julianna Pena seemed lost for underhooks, whether she was making her entries in the open or where she usually makes it against the fence, which is problematic because I agree with you, Dan. GDR does her best defensive work from the fence. But even when she got a good entry in the open, she seemed lost for underhooks. And what does she go to? The old head and arm throw. And she couldn't even get that execution off because Nico Montano shut that down. Nico Montano shut her down for the first half of the fight, excuse me, until getting lost in her own minutia and shooting herself in the foot. So it really was, in other words, an unimpressive fight from Pena that I don't know how much stock you could really put into. And against GDR, you're right. She doesn't go for underhooks in the conventional way, Dan, because she does that weird thing where she'll do the tie plum, but she'll weave the one underhook in and she'll get her head off to an angle. And then she can just throw her knees and hoist off of her hips. It's really nice. She's been doing that since early in her career. She has gotten a little better of her first layer takedown defense as far as underhooks and digging against the fence. These are all great signs. These are also why I'm going to be siding with Germaine Randamie. I don't know if she gets the highlight reel knockout, like I believe you said or alluded to in the beginning of your breakdown. I believe this could be a sweaty affair. So bettors beware, depending on what side you take. It could be sweaty for that reason. That being said, I do see it being somewhat clear and GDR hitting Pena with enough shots, if not to put her out, but to put kind of panic in her mind and make her kind of fall apart to make it a clear win for GDR, who's my pick.
Yeah, I mean, look, Dan, Tom, I just wish that, because look, we're talking about slide chalk once again. I just wish that Germaine Randamie had this much accountability, took this much responsibility for what happened in that last fight. Because I've already told you 100 times, I cannot stand it when they try to, deflect the blame and, try to say they didn't want to fight me. It's like, dude, this is an MMA fight. You're allowed to shoot for takedowns. So if we could just get the mindset right, I'd be taking her here like as a bet too. And I might still, it's just that those kind of things give me hesitation. Those kind of things give me pause because I know Julianna Pena doesn't want to come out here and stand and bang with Germaine Randamie. I know exactly what Julianna Pena wants to do. Julianna Pena wants to take down Germaine Randamie and smash her face in. So, if that happens, is Germaine going to be like, oh, she didn't want to fight me. She just wanted to hug me and take me down. It's like, Germaine, you're allowed to do that stuff. This is MMA. So hopefully she's been working on that part of her game. At this point, she's almost 40 years old. So I'd hope she has. But again, back to the other stat we pointed out, the only person in UFC history to take her down is Amanda the Goat Nunes. So, Julianna Pena is nowhere near that level, but we know what Julianna wants to do. Julianna kind of reminds me of like Michael Chiesa, like a female version. The stand-up might not be the prettiest, but she gets you with that body lock. She gets on top of you. She's deceptively heavy on top, and she's got pretty decent ground and pound as well. And she's kind of relentless too. So that's the area of concern here, Dan Tom.
Totally. I guess last note on that. Yeah, I agree. Accountability would be nice, especially because people like us would already be giving her credit for the improvements that you stated. Like, she doesn't need to defend it. It kind of takes away from her own credibility, which is the sad part. But yeah. We'll see how that plays out. And I guess my last question on this is trying to figure out a way to politely put this, but there are certain things that I'll kind of auto fade depending. But do you know who Pena's training with this for this camp, Dan? Like, for example, is she training with Valley Flow striking over there?
So she's not with Ricky Little anymore?
I don't know. Is she training over there too? You know what I'm saying? Like, and again, these are very nice people who, train very nice people who I've had very nice interactions with. But let's just say if you follow certain trends of certain training, that can help do some of the decision making for you. And I'll just leave it at that. But I'm going to be picking Germaine Randamie here.
Well, I feel like people take this stuff the wrong way, man, because it's like at the end of the day, I mean, for me, I'm putting my money down, so I'm trying to bet. And people interpret it like, oh, you're saying that you would beat them in a fight? No. I'm not the one stepping in the cage. I want nothing to do with a fight with these people. I know that they would kill me in 30 seconds or less. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just, pointing out as a betting man, I want to know every single factor going into the fight, Dan Tom, if I'm going to put my cold hard-earned money on these fights. I got to know that kind of stuff, Dan Tom. So every little fact counts and matters in this game.
Yeah, especially in this pandemic era. I mean, for example, if you're a fighter that's normally used to training and traveling with a big camp, can you really be spouting that, oh, this fighter trains with a bigger camp? Are they? It's the pandemic era. So say what you will about GDR's training. How much grappling can she be doing in Amsterdam? Well, newsflash, guys, all her camps have been in Amsterdam. So it's actually probably works out better for fighters like that because, hey, guess what? They're used to training at home. Now they're in a pandemic era where they're forced to stay at home and train. Now the tables kind of turn, you could argue, and those fighters perhaps are in more comfortable spots, folks.
Very good point, Dan Tom. So we're definitely going to pay attention to the weigh-ins and the fight, and let's see what the deal is. So Dan Tom, in the middleweight division, we got Dusko Tudorovic making his UFC debut, and he's welcoming Dequan Townsend down to the middleweight division. Because as you know, Dequan, his 3 UFC fights so far have all been at 205. So now he's dropping the 20 pounds down to middleweight. Now, man, personally, I mean, we're going to break this fight down, but personally, I can't wait to hear Bruce Buffer announce Dusko Tudorovic, because Dusko Tudorovic, you know what I mean? I love how he pronounces Jan Blachowicz. It's not Jan Blachowicz, it's Blachowicz, so the Vish is very exciting, but take all that stuff aside. Let's break down this matchup. So Dusko Tudorovic, what I like about this kid is that, he might not have, the K1 striking credentials. He might not have a D1 wrestling background, but this kid is a hustler. This kid is a gamer, and this kid wants to win by any means necessary. You can hit this guy with your hardest shot, knock his mouthpiece out, and he's gonna keep going forward the entire time, Dan Tom. You know what's something else I like about Dusko Tudorovic is that oftentimes when you see someone shooting for multiple takedowns and they can't get those takedowns, then you start to see them get discouraged. Then you start to see them slow down. I mean, Dusko Tudorovic is the opposite of that, man. He shot like 20 takedowns in his Contender Series fight, didn't land a single one, and he still kept going forward the entire time. So that is the mindset of a winner. So automatically, I like this kid a lot. And you talk about his regional experience because, again, you know how I like to talk about the kids that have had less than 10 pro fights. Well, when you talk about serious experience, how about a first-round knockout over Michel Pereira, who everybody's very, very high on, who's 3-1 in the who's 3-1 in the UFC, or actually no, he lost to Connolly. Yeah, 3-1. He beat Diego Sanchez. He's 3-1 in the UFC. So yeah, I mean, he knocked him out in the first round. I mean, like normally if you talk about beating a guy like Michel Pereira, you talk about avoiding the striking exchanges, clinching him up against the fence, hugging him to death, taking him down. But Dusko went out there, stood and banged with him, and knocked him out in the first round. So I like this kid, Dusko Tudorovic, a lot. Now, when you talk about Dequan Townsend, now the positives are he's very experienced. I mean, he's had, 20, 30 pro fights. I think he's had over 30 pro fights. So the guy is out here bringing a lot of experience to the table. He comes out of that Michigan fight scene, and they got a lot of really good fighters there. Obviously Jamal Hill, who I'm very, very high on. He's unranked at light heavyweight, but I think Jamal Hill is honestly a potential future top 5 guy. Yeah, I said it. Quote me on that. Jamal Hill is the real deal. So look out for him. Now, Jamal Hill actually went 5 rounds with Dequan Townsend back when Jamal Hill was like 3-0. And just the fact that Dequan Townsend's been there with all these tough guys, I like the experience, and I also like the fact that he hits really hard too. When there's space, when there's distance, the guy can crack. It's just that the biggest weakness is the takedown defense and the lack of get up and the hustle. He doesn't have the same hustle that Dusko Tudorovic has. So he has to win this fight by knockout if he's going to win. Dequan Townsend, that is. If Dequan Townsend does not knock out Dusko Tudorovic, he's losing this fight, period, point blank. And I think that Dusko is going to pin him up against the fence. I think he's going to take him down. I think he's going to land some big ground and pound. And I think there's a chance he actually comes out here and finishes the fight. So I guess, one angle you can attack it on is, well, how's Dequan going to look, moving down 20 pounds? Well, the interesting thing, Dan Tom, is that yeah, he might be moving down 20 pounds compared to his last 3 fights, but I've actually seen him at 170 pounds on the regional scene too. So we've seen him in 3 different weight classes. And let me just tell you right now, the takedown defense wasn't better at 170. It wasn't better at 185. It's been the same thing his entire career. So he's not stopping a takedown. He's not getting up from a takedown either. I got Dusko Tudorovic winning this fight, and I think he does so with a statement win.
Yeah, I think Dequan Townsend is fighting at the right weight class, but like you said, not just takedown defense. More importantly for me, I don't think it's going to make too much of a difference. Definitely not enough difference in the speed department, and that's where I see Dusko having a big advantage. Dan, am I crazy? This guy kind of reminds me of like a Robert Whittaker, maybe because he comes from a traditional Korean martial art. He's the Taekwondo black belt as opposed to, I believe, what was Robert Whittaker's Hapkido black belt, right? But then they transfer over, and this kid's got a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt as well. Dusko does. But you see him putting his hands together and developing his boxing since he's been in MMA, and his hand speed is just really impressive. I like it. I like that a guy can put the hands together despite coming from a Taekwondo base. Being a Taekwondo black belt myself was very hard to even go into different styles of traditional martial arts, much less straight up boxing or kickboxing. It's a very big jump. I really like what Dusko has been able to do. And so if it does hit the ground, he should have the advantage there. I just do find it interesting. I ended up on the same side as you, Dan, but I do find it interesting that Dequan has to get a knockout or bust. And I totally see what you mean, and I don't disagree. I'm just saying that it would seem, if you look at it on paper, that it would seem different, right? Aside from the freak, and I mean that in the complimentary sense, Dolce Lagiambula, that's the only guy really to knock out Townsend in what's been, 35 or well over 30 fights off the top of my head. I mean, so if you're only getting, stopped once by KO in 30 plus fights, that's pretty darn impressive. That being said, this guy doesn't have the best cardio. He doesn't have the best process. So if you look into it a little deeper beyond the stats, I agree with you, Dan, as far as maybe, his chances not getting any brighter. But when you look at Dusko on paper, again, I'm like you. I want to be careful to not discredit a guy for early finishes because Dusko's really impressed me on Contender Series and otherwise. But you don't see a lot of third round. You don't see the decisions in there. He's got to get those. This would be a good guy to get it again. So if he doesn't if he doesn't finish Townsend in the first round, I'm not saying I'm going to be panicking if I've got Dusko in a parlay or something like that, folks, or whatever you're trying to use this matchup for. I'm just saying that this probably would even be a good fight, I dare say, if Dusko doesn't finish him because it's maybe a safer opponent to get those miles in. So from a prospect analytical point of view, I wouldn't mind it, but keep that in mind if you're looking to bet on these kind of fights because a lot of these chalk fights will force bettors. I know you're not a prop guy or a parlay guy much, Dan, but you know how it goes. These chalk lines will force bettors to kind of taking those angles because everybody wants to try to find their proverbial value. So be careful as far as investing too much early or even trying to be contrarian and investing too much under.
Well, Dan Tom used a word that we got to put some emphasis on, and that word was force. This will force bettors to do this. This will force bettors to do that. You should never put yourself in a situation where you have to force a bet. If the line is too wide, go ahead and pass. How about just put Dusko in your DraftKings lineup because he's probably going to come out here, get a bunch of takedowns. But if you don't feel comfortable enough to lay it straight, well, don't go out there and parlay it. I mean, the only way you should parlay it is if you feel comfortable enough laying both legs straight. If you don't, then there's no reason to parlay it at all. So never force a bet. If you're not comfortable, you think the line's too wide, go ahead and pass. I mean, it's his UFC debut. He's had less than 10 pro fights, so I completely understand not being that confident. It's just I personally like what I've seen from this kid, and I don't like what I've seen from Dequan at the UFC level. So that's why I'm picking the kid. But again, you should never force a bet. But I got Dusko Tudorovic for the win.
Great lesson and great reminder for the kids. I also got Dusko, and I do think he gets it done early, by the way. Contrarian talk aside, ultimately, Dequan Townsend, he's on that Kadis Ibragimov run right now.
We'd love to have Kadis Ibragimov in the NFC. Hey, so real quick, everybody watching, let us know who you got down below in the comments. Subscribe to the Line Movement. Follow us at line_movement. Go to linemovement.com, Apple Podcast as well. Give us that 5-star review. Truly appreciate it. Now, Dan Tom, I'm very curious to see if we're on the same side for this next fight in the welterweight division between the natural born killer, the former interim UFC welterweight champion, the former WEC welterweight champion, just a legend of the sport, Carlos Condit. And he's taking on, the former Ultimate Fighter winner and a true inspiration, a guy who has overcome some serious, stuff outside the cage, and Court McGee. And man, this is a hell of a matchup because right now it's actually Court McGee who's the slight favorite. And if I would have told you 5 years ago, Dan Tom, that Court McGee would be a slight favorite over Carlos Condit, I know for a fact you'd laugh in my face like it was the biggest joke you've ever heard. But that's what we're dealing with in 2020. Carlos Condit's an underdog to Court McGee. And I actually saw a very interesting stat. And it's funny, I'm bringing up a stat and I'm about to butcher the stat, but it was something among the ballpark of this, that Court McGee has attempted somewhere around 115 takedown attempts in his UFC career. Now, if you're on the Court McGee side here, that's a very encouraging stat, because even in Carlos Condit's prime, he was never known for his takedown defense. He was always known for his scrambling ability when he gets taken down, and how, those elbows from bottom, which back in the day were such a big weapon. But it seems like the sport's evolved now to where people can kind of neutralize that. It's not as big of a deal as it used to be. But like, I remember, watching him have that, that war in the WEC with what's the guy's name? Miura?
Hiro Mitsumura, WEC 35. Oh yeah.
Him. So, dude, when he got taken down, those elbows from bottom, even the first Martin Kampmann fight, which at the time I thought he won, just seeing that was like something I'd never seen before, those vicious elbows from bottom. So at the time, I mean, the dude was just spectacular. It's just that he kind of really hasn't evolved. Now, the thing here is that, not to disrespect Court McGee, who, like I said, the guy's an inspiration if you hear his story, and he's just he's a go-getter. But this is the most average opponent that Carlos Condit has fought in a very long time. This is the first non-top 15 or non-former top 15 opponent that Carlos Condit's fought in a long time. So it's like, if Carlos has ever had a chance to win a fight in his current form, it would be this one. But it's just, Dan Tom, do you think it'll even make a difference? I mean, do you think Carlos is so far gone that he can't even come out here and beat Court McGee, or you think he's going to go out on a win?
I remember, and this is before like the BJ Penn was completely washed days, that you remember, I think it was UFC 127. He was originally supposed to face Carlos Condit, and I remember being 137, yeah. And I remember being so worried for my boy at the time, BJ, right? Like, what? They're going to put him against the natural born killer? No, man, this is bad news. We might see BJ Penn get finished for real for the first time outside of that huge second fight. I mean, this is how far back in time we're having to go, folks. But now you look at Carlos Condit's current record, and the guy's doing a BJ Penn impression. And he's like a couple losses away from, completing that impression. That's really sad as a Carlos Condit fan. Of course, Hiro Mitsumura is a great shout, Dan. It's my favorite Carlos Condit fight. But long are the days, and I'm one of the guys who is probably one of the last people to say a fighter shot. And I'm definitely one of the last fighters of people to, even throw into the speculation cloud that someone is showing up for a paycheck, Dan. But I feel like I'm getting that vibe more and more, and it's about Carlos Condit. It's about guys in Carlos Condit's class, right? If there's a class of fighters, for example, I kind of said this about Robbie Lawler, and and say what you will, but it's just very uninspiring performances, and when it's clearly there's something missing and these guys are deciding to show up, I believe, we both, as respectfully as possible, may have lobbied that at Tyron Woodley, again, right in the same class of fighter, weight class of age, etc. All these things, it's not a coincidence. They're at that age, man, where they're one of the few guys still drawing decent show monies. And there's a reason why the real contenders that are drawing somewhat decent money are picking their fights very carefully in this pandemic age. We're not seeing them. It's because they've got a lot to lose, right? They know they've got a lot to lose. They need their ducks in a row. Their management knows they need their ducks in a row. But you get these older guys who already get this guaranteed show money, and you're wondering why they're doing it despite these results, why they're taking matches that are like, okay, I could get it like Court McGee. Maybe you think you're going to get an easy fight out of him. But if you actually do the tape or anybody in the know, you'll know that, okay, durable guys that keep grinding that's probably the worst matchup you could throw against Carlos Condit in his prime. Would I pick him to beat McGee in his prime? Of course, Dan. But if I wanted to pick a fight, even for a prime Carlos Condit for him to look good, am I going to pick a durable guy who can actually one of the few guys who can actually match him in output and cardio? Like, that's Carlos Condit's edge. That's always been his edge, even back in that Mira fight. It was outlasting these guys. He didn't have better takedown defense or even better grappling all the time, like you stated, Dan. It was the fact that he would dog it out, use his long frame to find offense, whether it's submissions, elbows, or knees, and he would dog it out and outlast these guys, man. He was a third-round king. Carlos, they talked about Robbie Lawler round 5. How about Carlos Condit round 3? Even in fights he lost, he was owning Johnny Hendricks. That's when he dropped George St. Pierre with the head kick. Carlos Condit round 3 is a motherfucker, man. Pardon my French. But I haven't seen that Carlos Condit round 3 for a while, and I haven't seen any sort of semblance of Carlos Condit in general in any round for years now. So for that reason, I'm going to pick Court McGee. If I pick Court McGee, albeit semi-reluctantly, to upset a guy that's an up-and-comer like Sean freaking Brady, and Court McGee, say what you will, did better than I think even Brady's supporters will give him credit for that. It's kind of hard to not pick him against a guy like Carlos Condit, who, again, I don't see him offering anything. I'm a big Carlos Condit fan. I just don't see him offering anything at this point of the career, Dan.
Yeah, so the reason I knew it was UFC 137 and not UFC 127, Dan Tom, is because, let me tell you this. I had tickets to see UFC 137 when GSP was supposed to fight Nick Diaz the first time, and Carlos Condit was supposed to fight BJ Penn in the co-main event. And then what ended up happening was Nick Diaz didn't show up to the press conference, and at the time, that was like a big deal. So they scrapped the fight, and then the main event ends up being BJ Penn versus Nick Diaz, which was a fucking great fight. It's just that was like the only good fight on the card. And I had already paid to see GSP versus Nick Diaz and BJ Penn versus Carlos Condit. So even though I ended up being able to see BJ Penn versus Nick Diaz, which was awesome, I didn't get the 2 marquee matchups that I paid for. So I'll still never forget about that. But look, as far as this matchup is concerned, so this is interesting because even though I agree with you, Carlos is shot, and not to disrespect a legend, that's not what I'm trying to do. It's just we're just being factual. I mean, you're talking about money on the line, so I'm just going to be honest. I'm not going to sugarcoat. But I wouldn't say it's on the same level as Tyron Woodley. Here's why. When you talk about Tyron Woodley's last 3 fights, there hasn't even been a moment of success. There hasn't even been 1 minute where he did something that made you feel like, oh, like he's going to win this round. He's going to win this second. He's going to do, like, he's lost 14 and a half straight rounds. That's over an hour straight of fighting. At least with Condit, even though, and I think my jiu-jitsu coach put it best, he kind of said that after the Lawler fight, Condit kind of lost his mojo a little bit, which is what I kind of think happened. But like, even in these last 2 fights, I've seen little glimpses. Like in the Alex Cowboy fight, he takes Alex Cowboy's back, almost chokes him out, then the round ends. In the Michael Chiesa fight, he had a nice armbar attempt in that first round. So he's had little signs of life here and there, which like makes me feel like against a much lesser opponent, no disrespect to Court McGee, but has Court McGee ever been ranked ever in his life, Dan Tom? No. Has he ever been close to the top 20? No. So at least Carlos Condit has had little moments here and there versus these current top 15 guys or former top 15 guys. Whereas like Woodley, I mean, he won't even throw a punch. But back to this fight, I feel like Court McGee is a little overrated in this spot. Let me explain what I mean. Condit's lost 5 in a row. I mean, it's not like Court's on some win streak. Court's lost 4 of his last 5. And like, yeah, he was tough against Brady, but like Brady is a grinder. Brady was going out there dropping Court McGee. So I'm not exactly like getting impressed by these Court McGee performances at all. So on one hand, you do have the stat about the takedown attempts, which would be very useful for Court McGee here. It's just that, man, Carlos is better than Court McGee. So it's a really tough one for me to call, man, because it's like, I feel like on the feet, Condit can actually have success here. I could see Condit landing a head kick here. He actually threw a couple head kicks against Chiesa. It's just he got taken down so quick. I'm just sketched out by Court McGee as slight chalk in the spot. And Vegas actually opened Condit a slight favorite here. So you made a fantastic argument for McGee. And I can't really say anything against that argument. I mean, the pressure guy against Condit, who has historically has struggled with pressure guys. I mean, you're right. I mean, I can't argue with that. It's just that this is like such a step down in competition compared to the guys he's been fighting. But again, if you want to take the BJ Penn route, Dennis Seaver was a step down from the guys he was fighting. Clay Guida was a step down from the guys he was fighting. So you might be right. I might be 100% wrong on this. but my gut is saying this might be a win for Carlos Condit. He might retire on a win, put his gloves in the center of that octagon, and go out with a W, because it's like Court McGee's not some young up-and-comer. Court McGee is a couple fights away from retirement too. So I kind of line this a dead pick'em. So I'm going to actually lean with the dog reluctantly. I'm going to take the natural-born killer Carlos Condit here. I hope I'm right. I mean, probably you're right. You know, I'm sure I'm going to be wrong about this one, but I just got to go with my gut here. I'm going to take the natural-born killer to have one more moment of success. Maybe he edges a close split decision that people think could have gone the other way. I'm not saying he's going to be dominant or anything like that, but I do feel like he's got an edge standing, and maybe he can scramble enough to get back up to the feet. I just don't feel like Court McGee is some young up-and-comer. I feel like this is two old guys. I mean, basically, if you want to know the truth, Dan Tom, both Court McGee and Carlos Condit, and I wasn't supposed to talk about this, but for the Line Movement MMA betting show, we can reveal some insider information. Why not? But only if you guys subscribe right now and give this video a like. Did it? Okay. Here's the insider information. Both Carlos Condit and Court McGee turned down a fight with UFC newcomer Phil Rowe, who actually, he won on Contender Series. He actually has the longest reach in the welterweight division. You know, he's kind of one of these long bodies, one of these, precise, accurate strikers, a very good prospect. So Phil Rowe, I got against both of them, but they both turned down Phil Rowe. So now the UFC was like, all right, y'all two can fight and figure it out. So that's why I'm kind of like, I don't know, man. It's two old guys in there. Let me take the dog, who I think is the better fighter. So I'll reluctantly side with the natural-born killer, Carlos Condit. Let the chips fall where they may. Let's see what happens, Dan Tom.
Yeah, man, I hope I'm wrong too. I hope you're right. And again, you're doing something that I like to do, Dan. You're fading the public because, for what it's worth, the odds makers agreed with you, Dan. They opened up Court McGee as a plus 120 underdog. I think you would agree with that line a little more. However, the public has moved the line. They moved him to a favorite. So for that reason, I'll feel bad if I end up playing, even as a better without the bias of being a Carlos Condit fan, I would still feel bad for playing this line, because if you play on the McGee side, you missed out on the dog odds. That being said, the point of entry is still there, and I do think it is ultimately, at the end of the day, a tough fight. And just last note on this, which kind of goes into your take, is that again, Carlos Condit, say what you will about any speculation of being done or showing up for a paycheck, went to his social media. He looks like he's training really hard. He's splitting time both at Jackson Wink and the BMF Ranch. He looks to be in fantastic shape. These are great signs if you are a Carlos Condit fan or are trying to look to support him at the betting window in this fight. Whereas Court McGee, to my previous point, Dan, I like that Court McGee, is training at Factory X, win or lose, whatever improvements and credit you want to give him. A lot of that can be done for the Factory X guys and that crew. But if you look at Court McGee's socials, again, to my previous point, he hasn't been training during this, traveling during this COVID time. So he's back training at SLC. With Ramsey Nijam and company. So make of that what you will. But yeah, that makes it very, very interesting as far as the line movement and where this fight will end up. And I'm going to stick with the McGee pick for now.
Now, Dan Tom, you know that this next fight between Loma Lookboonme and Jinh Frey, the only reason we're going to talk about this fight is because of you. I know you got a soft spot for Loma. So, Dan Tom, the floor is yours, my friend.
Oh, man, I'm a fan of Loma Lookboonme, the Thai style fighter there. She kind of reminds me of Sohee Ham, even though Sohee Ham was, of course, Korean. She will fight from kind of both stances, not a dedicated southpaw like Sohee Ham. A little bit of a different style, but they're so savvy. They are both, unfortunately, so very small. I mean, this is a girl that probably should be fighting at atom weight, where she would thrive. Luckily for her, she's facing a former atom weight, a girl who is really muscular to make atom weight. Maybe it's not the worst thing, even though she's a smaller straw weight to be coming up to this weight class. But Jinh Frey, is no joke. She's very well rounded. More tougher than meets the eye, but she's not beyond being rocked. She's not beyond being pressed on. She will try to answer, volume, which is good. Whether she does it effectively or not, she has those instincts you like to see. She's got a couple of preset counters that do work well for her in her defense. However, when it comes to countering and just overall skill savvy, I think she's going to find herself in a whirlpool with Loma Lookboonme. However, I'm going to be curious to see if Jinh Frey goes to her ground game. It's worked for her before. It's burnt her before in certain cases. But as far as experience as an overall MMA fighter, getting looks against, other females or Asian females in different scenes, I would like to see, if you're a Jinh Frey fan, you would like to see her mix it up against Loma. But Loma's no slouch, too, trying to get her down. Not only does she have that first layer takedown defense, like a lot of Thai fighters, they've got those crafty trips. And we've seen her even get on top of Angie Hill, land a couple of elbows. If she can develop that, that'll be interesting. So, of course, I'm a little bit biased toward Loma, although I'm a Jinh fan as well. Don't get it twisted, folks. But I'm leaning toward Loma in this spot. What about you, Dan? I'm curious if you're leaning toward the favorite, or in these close fights like this, is this another classic dog or pass with the ladies, man?
Okay, so here's what I think. So I am leaning towards Loma. I feel like she's got the better output, and I feel like she'll project to go farther in her UFC career. But I do feel like she's slightly overrated, and that's no disrespect. The reason why I'm saying that is she's only 4-2 as a professional MMA fighter. And while you can give her a lot of credit as a 4-2 fighter, she's great for only 4-2. That's pretty damn badass. It's just that when you talk about 4-2 fighters, I'm thinking regional scene. I'm thinking on the come up. So she's pretty advanced for where she's at. It's just that we got to assess her honestly because she's in the UFC right now taking these fights. But luckily for her, she just had a great experience going 3 rounds with a top 15 fighter in Angela Hill. And also luckily for her, she's fighting a fighter that's kind of on her way out. I mean, Jinh Frey, she had a great career. I just feel like she kind of got to the UFC a little bit too late. You know what I mean? And now she's moving up a weight class, which is good. The weight cuts aren't going to be as intense. But I feel like Loma probably wants it a little bit more, is a little bit hungrier, can kind of bite down on that mouthpiece, get a little meaner. And obviously, I like her Muay Thai techniques too. Those trips are very nice. She's kind of rounding out her game. If you watch her early career, the ground game wasn't quite there, but now it is. Not that she's some black belt, but she's starting to hit some takedowns. She's starting to get some top position. She's starting to get up from bottom. So it's a step in the right direction. I don't like the fact that she went to a split decision with Alexandra Albu. But again, man, it's like when you talk about fighters with less than 10 pro fights, it's every single fight is a learning process. So I expect a better version this time around. And I think she'll just outgun Jinh Frey with a little more output, slightly edge out the rounds, maybe mix in a trip takedown or 2 along the way, and just kind of edge out the decision here.
I could see that. I just wonder if Loma lands hard and early. Does Jinh Frey get those Sohee Ham flashbacks? So that comparison I laid earlier, I don't know, but otherwise, yeah, I feel that's a very fair way that you stated it there, especially with the perhaps, unfortunately, Jinh Frey maybe getting there a little too late. Maybe she missed out on a nice Michelle Waterson matchup of former atomweights there. We'll see.
Well, Dan, Tom, last but not least in the bantamweight division, we saved the best for last. I'm very excited to talk about this matchup between Kenney and Heili Alateng. This should be a very, very exciting fight while it lasts. Look, Kenney is a guy that I have so much respect for, man. We can talk about his regional experience. He destroyed and dominated Brandon Royval, who's coming off that fight of the night, who's coming off 2 straight bonuses, by the way. He put a clinic on Royval, just an MMA masterpiece, the way he mixed up his striking to his takedowns, the way he kept that top control. And you look at his last 6-7 fights, it's all been against UFC level competition. All these guys he's been fighting are either in the UFC or formerly in the UFC. I know Manny Bermudez is not in the UFC anymore, but he didn't get cut because of fighting abilities. He got cut because he missed weight every single fight. That was more so a thing where it's like, dude, don't slap the promoter in the face. You know what I mean? Don't piss on the matchmakers. You know what I mean? So piss on or piss off, whichever way you ought to look at it, it's the same thing, right there, Tom. But it's one of those things, man, where Manny Bermudez kind of did that to himself. He's his own worst enemy. And you want to know something else, Dan, Tom? You know how Manny Bermudez missed weight for 135? Then they're like, you know what? Move up to 45. Misses weight for 145, gets cut from the UFC. And then they're like, you know what? On the regional scene, let's fight at 55. Misses weight for 155. So Manny Bermudez got to get his shit together, young man. But back to this fight, man. So Casey Kenney, I'm very, very high on this guy. You know, I feel like he's got the well-rounded skill set. You know, he's got a judo black belt. So, I mean, barely uses his judo, but he's got that in the back pocket. You know, he's like a national champ judo guy. He's got the wrestling background. I actually had a full ride scholarship for wrestling as well. But, dude, he can strike too. He's got some stiff punches. He's got some hard kicks. So I like the whole game for Casey Kenney. And his only UFC loss is to Merab Dvalishvili, which is like no shame at all. Merab is an absolute, I mean, they call him the machine for a reason. The guy landed 12 takedowns in that fight. The guy goes out there, every single fight sets takedown records. And, you know, Casey Kenney was able to get up for most of them. Very impressive. And then also to make your UFC debut against a guy like Ray Borg, and not just win the fight, Dan Tom, but score takedowns against a guy like Ray Borg. And then whenever Ray Borg would take him down, he'd scramble out, get on top. Like, I like this kid, Casey Kenney, a lot. Now, let's give some credit to Heili Alateng, man. I mean, firstly, he's got a big right hand, man. That guy, this kid can crack. And also, he's got some decent takedowns, too. I don't think his takedowns are necessarily going to work in this fight, but he's definitely no slouch on the mat. You know what I mean? He's a well-rounded kid. Got a fight of the night in the debut against Dana Batgerol, and then also, you know, beat Ryan Benoit. But, man, I got to give him some credit, too, because, you know, he had that fight against Kai Asakura where he got knocked out with the knee in like 30 seconds, got his jaw broken. And then the guy rebounds, makes it to the UFC. Now he's quietly 2-0 in the UFC. So Heili Alateng is my kind of guy. Just the fact that he's so resilient to be undefeated in the UFC at this point and to make it on that run and not get discouraged after what would be a fight-ending, you know, performance for many people after getting their jaw broken are never coming back the same. This guy parlayed it to 2 straight wins in the UFC. So all the respect in the world. It's just that, man, he's kind of outgunned in this fight. You know, I feel like Casey Kenney, as long as he watches out for that right hand, because Dan Tom, as you know, southpaw against orthodox, you know, southpaw is susceptible to that big right hand. So just Casey, watch out for this right hand. But if he watches out for this right hand, Dan Tom, I feel like, you know how I just talked about how a southpaw is susceptible to overhand from an orthodox? Well, guess what? An orthodox is susceptible to a left body kick from a southpaw. And I think Casey Kenney is going to come out here, land a big body kick. I think he's not going to throw as much hands. I think he's going to throw more kicks on the feet. But then once he mixes in the takedowns, then he's going to be in his world. I feel like he's going to control Heili Alateng, get off on some ground and pound, maybe even get a submission along the way. I feel like Casey Kenney is going to come out here and dominate this fight. And again, that's no disrespect to Heili, who I got a lot of respect for, a guy that's overcome adversity. That big right hand, we keep talking about that. And, you know, there's a famous quote from John Jones before he fought Ryan Bader, because, you know, Ryan Bader kept mentioning in his pre-fight interview about how, oh, all John Jones has is, you know, the spins and the flash, and that's about it. So John Jones, his response, because John Jones is a head games master, he was like, he's like, there's a famous quote, you can hear a man's thoughts through his words. So Ryan Bader says, all I got is flash and spin. Well, that's exactly what he's afraid of, and that's what I'm going to throw at him. So Casey Kenney's been mentioning this big right hand by Heili Alateng in all his interviews. So I know that's what Casey's worried about, but knowing the kind of IQ that Casey has, knowing how smart this kid is, I don't think he's going to be exchanging too much hands with Heili Alateng. I think he's going to be throwing a lot of kicks, mixing takedowns, and win that way. I got Casey Kenney to win this fight decisively.
Yeah, man, I got to be honest, putting my cards on the table, Dusko and Casey are probably 2 of my favorite as far as playable chalk goes within that department. You know, don't be surprised if I talk about those in my my betting article. And I still have to finish running through a little bit more of the comb on this one, Dan. So forgive me for sounding confident, but when I look at this fight, something screams late fight submission for Casey Kenney for me on this. You know, Alateng, he's got high rankings as far as freestyle wrestling in China goes, and don't overlook it just because it's China. However, you should look that it is freestyle. And again, the difference between freestyle and folk style, freestyle more on the world stage, hence we see it in China, but less control and different point scoring emphasis as far as that goes, folks. Whereas the control translates from folk style to MMA very well. Hence guys like Ben Askren can come in here and just spam certain types of control and rides, right? Alateng doesn't necessarily have that. In fact, if you look at his submission wins, it's not a surprise. They all come 5+ years ago to guys in like Kunlun Fight Organization. You know what I'm saying? We'll leave it at that. So I don't think he is that much of a threat for his wrestling. And like you said, Dan, it's probably not going to serve him well here. He is a super overachiever, though, as far as an athlete, both in the power that you described in his right hand and in scrambles and just in general. I mean, this guy is a powerful guy. He's more powerful than his frame and then his looks suggest. So Casey Kenney does have to be safe. I do like that. You know, I'd like it if you were in Casey Kenney's corner, Dan, because you're saying the right things. You know, let's keep it on the outside. Let's play all the way out, or let's play all the way in. And I think Casey Kenney does just that. It's also going to be a southpaw. He really hasn't had a lot of at least high-level southpaw looks, Heili Alateng has when you look through his record. So now he's going to have an actual southpaw who can compose himself on the feet. So I'm not necessarily worried for Casey Kenney there. He's also, Casey Kenney, much stronger than his frame suggests, hence why he moved from flyweight to bantamweight in the first place. I think he's in the right weight class now. I'm really high on this kid as well. And I feel like he's going to be cooking Alateng until a late round submission here. So, yeah, I'll probably be definitely writing up this fight.
Well, we can't wait to see how it plays out. Dan Tom, thank you very much for joining me on this special edition of the Line Movement MMA betting show. All the fans, make sure y'all like this video, subscribe, go to linemovement.com, follow us on Twitter at line_movement, Apple Podcasts, hit that subscribe, iTunes, 5-star review. We truly appreciate it. And also shout out to our producer, Jordan, to everybody behind the scenes, Brian, Joe, Dan, Nick, everybody, James Lynch. Thank you very much for filling in for me last week. Truly appreciate that. And man, this has been a lot of fun. I cannot wait for next week because we got the Korean Zombie taking on Brian Ortega. It's been a long time in the making. You know, there's a lot of bad blood. Going to be great to talk those fights. So everybody enjoy the fights. Everybody stay safe, and we will speak soon. Hey guys, if you like what you see, make sure you click any of the videos and subscribe to Line Movement right now.